He's my real father. You're not. My daughter said it from 6 feet away, standing in the middle of our living room, with her arms folded and tears shining in her eyes. For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard her. Katie had called me dad since she was 3 years old. I had taught her to ride a bike in the cracked driveway behind our old duplex. I had sat through school concerts where she barely touched her clarinet. I had learned which brand of cereal she would eat and which one she swore tasted like cardboard. When her mother died, I was the one who stayed awake outside Katie's bedroom because she was afraid to sleep alone. And now at 17, she was looking straight at me and telling me none of that made me her father. Say that again, I said. She wiped one cheek with the heel of her hand. I said, Michael is my real father. Michael is the man who disappeared. He's still my biological father. And where was he when you had pneumonia in 5th grade? Where was he when your mother was dying? Katie's face changed. I saw the hurt before she answered, but I was too angry to stop. You always do that. Do what? Keep a list. I stared at her. A list. Everything you've ever done for me. Every doctor's appointment, every school thing. Every time you stayed up late, you bring it all out whenever I disagree with you. That's not what I'm doing. It feels like it. The words hit harder than I expected. I had spent 14 years trying to make sure that girl never felt unwanted, and somehow she was standing there, telling me my love felt like a debt. You think I did all that so you'd owe me? I don't know anymore. That was the moment I lost my temper. Then maybe you should go ask Michael what he's done for you. Katie flinched. I wished I could take it back before the sentence had even finished leaving my mouth. But she was angry too. Maybe I will. She turned and headed upstairs. Katie, she didn't stop. A few minutes later, she came back down carrying a canvas overnight bag. My stomach dropped. What are you doing? I'm staying at Emma's. No, you're not. I already talked to her mom. You're 17, and I need space. This is your home. She looked at me then, and for the first time that evening, the anger left her face. What replaced it was worse. Exhaustion. Maybe that's the problem, Dad. I heard the word, Dad, but I was too wounded to understand what it meant. You walk out that door because of him. I said, don't pretend this is about needing space. Her eyes filled again. You still don't get it. Then she opened the front door. Cold November air rolled into the room. Katie. She paused. For one hopeful second, I thought she might turn around. Instead, she said quietly, I love you, but I can't keep fighting with you. Then she walked out. I stood there listening to her car start in the driveway. The house went silent. Not ordinary silence, the kind that makes every little sound feel accusatory, the refrigerator humming the clock over the mantel, ticking, the furnace clicking on. I lowered myself onto the couch and stared at the framed photograph beside the lamp. Linda was smiling in it. Katie was 3 years old, sitting on her lap in a yellow sundress. I was standing behind them, one hand on Linda's shoulder. Back then, I had no idea that little girl would become the center of my life. And I certainly had no idea that 14 years later, I would be sitting alone in the same house, wondering how I had become the person she needed to get away from. 14 years earlier, Katie had been a 3-year-old with crooked pigtails and a stubborn belief that grilled cheese tasted better when it was cut into triangles. I met her mother, Linda, at a neighborhood cookout outside Harrisburg. I was 46, then divorced for several years, and fairly certain I had missed my chance at having a family. Linda changed that slowly. Katie changed it faster. The first time I picked Linda up for dinner, Katie stood behind her mother's leg and inspected me like a suspicious little customs officer. Are you George? I am. My mommy says you fix things. I try. She disappeared into the living room and returned carrying a plastic toy horse with one leg missing. Fix this. Linda covered her face. I laughed. 20 minutes later, I was sitting at their kitchen table with superglue while Katie supervised. That was how it started. Michael existed mostly as a name. He and Linda had been young when Katie was born. He left before Katie was old enough to remember him clearly. Linda never filled the house with bitterness about him, and I respected that. I never asked Katie to call me anything but George. Then one Saturday morning, about a year after Linda and I met, I was tightening the training wheels on Katie's bicycle. She climbed onto the seat and shouted toward Linda, Mom, Dad says I'm ready. All three of us froze. Katie didn't. Come on, Dad. So I pushed her down the driveway. I never told her how much that word meant to me. Linda and I married the following spring. Life after that wasn't remarkable, which is probably why I treasure it so much now. There were grocery runs, little league games for our neighbors' kids' school concerts, Saturday pancakes, arguments over bedtime, and summer trips to a rented cabin in the Poconos. I packed terrible lunches. Linda used to open Katie's lunchbox after school and laugh. George, crackers and cheese do not become a balanced meal because you added grapes. There are 3 food groups in there. That is not how food groups work. Katie would laugh until milk came out of her nose. Then Linda got sick. Katie was 11. The year that followed reduced our world to oncology appointments, prescription bottles, casseroles from neighbors, and trying not to look frightened in front of one another. Linda died on a rainy Tuesday morning. I remember coming home that afternoon and finding Katie sitting on the kitchen floor in her socks. She looked up at me. What happens to me now? I understood the question beneath the question. Who stays? I sat beside her. You stay with me. For how long? As long as you need me. She leaned against my shoulder and cried. I kept that promise. But raising an 11-year-old girl alone taught me very quickly that love and competence were not the same thing. I could replace a water heater. I could change brake pads. I could negotiate with an insurance company. I had no idea what to say when Katie came home crying because 3 girls at school had stopped sitting with her at lunch. My instinct was to solve it. Give me their parents' numbers. Dad, what you cannot call their parents. Apparently that was obvious to everyone except me. As Katie got older, the problems became less fixable. Sometimes she wanted advice. Sometimes she wanted silence. I was remarkably bad at knowing which was which. Still, we managed. At least I thought we did. For years, being Katie's father became the most certain thing about me. I never imagined that certainty could frighten me. And I certainly never imagined that one day a man from Katie's past would return and make me question whether staying was enough. Michael came back into our lives on a Thursday afternoon. I was at the kitchen counter sorting mail when my phone rang. The number wasn't saved, but it had a Pennsylvania area code, so I answered. George speaking. There was a pause. This is Michael Carter. I knew the name before my mind had time to place the voice. My hand tightened around the phone. What do you want? I figured you'd ask that. Then answer it. He didn't argue. That bothered me more than if he had. I want to talk about Katie. No. George. You don't get to disappear for 14 years and call me out of nowhere to talk about Katie. I know, that stopped me. I'd expected excuses. I had spent years imagining what I would say if Michael ever appeared. In every version, he defended himself, and I tore his excuses apart. Instead, he said, I know I failed her. I looked toward the refrigerator where Katie's senior year calendar was held up by a magnet. What changed me eventually? Too late. He told me he was living near Pittsburgh now. He had steady work, had rebuilt parts of his life, and had spent years thinking about contacting Katie. I'm not asking her to call me Dad, he said. I'm not asking for anything from her. I just want her to know I'm here. She already has a father. I know that too. I ended the call without promising anything. Then I made my first real mistake. I didn't tell Katie. I convinced myself I was protecting her. Michael had already left once. Why should I let him walk back in just because regret had finally caught up with him? 2 weeks later, Katie found out. Michael had sent her a short message through social media. Nothing dramatic. He identified himself, apologized for contacting her directly, and said he would understand if she never replied. Katie came into the garage while I was changing the oil in my truck. Did Michael call you? I slid out from underneath the truck. My silence answered her. You knew Katie listened? How long? Couple weeks. Her face hardened. And you weren't going to tell me I hadn't decided. You hadn't decided I needed to know what he wanted. He's my biological father. Don't I get to decide whether I want to hear what he wants? That was the question I should have listened to. Instead, I heard something else. I heard 14 years being challenged by a man who hadn't earned 14 minutes. He abandoned you. I know. You don't know what he was like. Exactly. That answer stayed with me. Katie wasn't asking Michael to replace me. She wanted answers I couldn't give her. Did she look like her grandmother? Did anyone on that side of the family have her green eyes? Why had he left? Had he ever thought about her on birthdays? Questions about herself. But at the time, all I could see was the danger. Around then, I met Ann Whitaker. She was 57, a retired school counselor, who volunteered twice a week at the community center, where I helped with a holiday food drive. Anne wasn't flashy. She was warm, observant, and had a way of wading through silence instead of filling it. We started having coffee after volunteer shifts. One afternoon, I told her about Michael. I expected her to understand my position. She did. Unfortunately, she understood Katie's too. Wanting to know where she came from isn't the same as wanting another father, Anne said. You don't know Michael. No. He left her. Yes, so why should I make it easy for him? Anne stirred her coffee. Maybe this isn't about making anything easy for Michael. I frowned. Then what is it about Katie? I didn't like that answer. Over the next few weeks, Katie and I argued more than we had in years. Every conversation about Michael became a referendum on my place in her life. Then one evening she said she wanted to meet him. I said no. Katie stared at me across the living room. You don't get to decide this for me. As long as you're 17 and living under my roof, I absolutely do. Even as I said it, I knew I'd chosen authority because I was losing the argument. Katie's eyes filled, and a few minutes later she said the words I would hear in my head for days. He's my real father. You're not. For the first day after Katie left, I was furious. Not worried, not heartbroken. Furious. Anger was easier. I knew exactly where she was. Her friend Emma lived about 15 minutes away, and Emma's mother Denise had called me that night. She's safe, George, she said. She can stay here tonight. She has a home. I know. Then send her back. There was a pause. I think maybe both of you need a little time. I didn't appreciate Denise giving me parenting advice, but I thanked her for calling. Katie and I exchanged 2 texts that night. You okay? Yes. That was it. The next morning I made coffee for 2 out of habit. I stood there staring at the second mug before pouring it down the sink. By the second day I had constructed an entire case against Michael. He had returned. Katie had changed. Therefore Michael had caused this. Simple. Anne called that afternoon. I told her what had happened. She packed a bag and walked out, I said. 14 years, Anne. Then this man shows up, and suddenly I'm the problem. Did Katie say she was leaving because of Michael? She didn't have to. George. I hated the way she said my name when she thought I was avoiding something. She called him her real father. And what did you say before that I didn't answer? Anne waited. Finally, I told her. I told her I'd refused to let Katie meet Michael. I told her about the things I'd said during the argument. I even admitted that I'd reminded Katie of all the years Michael hadn't been there. Anne was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, what did Katie actually ask you for? To meet him. Anything else? No. Did she say she wanted to live with him? No. Did she say she wanted him instead of you? I stared through the kitchen window. No. Then when did this become a choice between the two of you? I didn't have an answer. Anne didn't push. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. That was when I started replaying the argument differently. Not from my side, from Katie's. She had asked to meet the man whose blood she carried. I had answered by telling her who had earned the right to be her father. She had asked questions about where she came from. I had treated those questions like accusations. And every time she moved one step toward Michael, I had grabbed tighter. By the third morning, anger had burned itself out. What remained wasn't pleasant. It was fear. I had lost Linda. For years after she died, some part of me expected life to take Katie too. So I protected her. Then I protected her harder. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped noticing the difference between protecting my daughter and controlling her. Michael had opened the door, but I was the one pushing Katie through it. That realization hurt worse than anything Michael could have done. I picked up my phone. Katie answered on the 4th ring. Hi. Her voice sounded tired. Hi, sweetheart. Silence. I swallowed. I owe you an apology. Another silence. I was wrong to make you feel like knowing Michael meant choosing between us. Katie breathed out slowly. I don't want to choose. I know that now. I just want answers. Dad. There it was again. Dad. This time I heard it. I know. Are you still saying I can't meet him? Every frightened instinct in me wanted to say yes. Instead, I said, no. Katie didn't immediately forgive me. She didn't announce she was coming home. She simply said, thank you. Then after a moment, I'm still not ready to come home tonight. That hurt. But for once, I didn't turn hurt into authority. Okay. Okay, take the time you need. Just keep me posted. I will. When the call ended, I sat there holding the phone. Nothing had been fixed. My daughter was still somewhere else. Michael was still coming into her life, and I was still afraid. But for the first time in 3 days, I understood something that should have been obvious all along. If I wanted Katie to come back to me, I had to stop pulling. Katie came home the following afternoon. There was no dramatic reunion. I heard her key in the front door while I was making chili, and suddenly she was standing in the kitchen with her overnight bag over one shoulder. "Hey," she said. "Hey." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I opened my arms. Katie hesitated only a second before stepping into them. I wanted to hold on. Instead, I let her decide when to pull away. 2 days later, she met Michael at a diner off Route 22. Katie asked me to drive her. That surprised me. "You sure you said I could meet him?" I meant, "Are you sure you want me to take you?" She looked out the passenger window. "I want you nearby." Those 4 words carried me through the next hour. Michael was already sitting in a booth when we arrived. He stood when he saw Katie. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Michael looked older than I remembered. Gray at his temples, lines around his eyes. Katie stared at him. "You have my nose," she finally said. Michael laughed nervously. "Actually, you have my mother's." Something changed in Katie's face. Not love. Recognition. I hated how much that frightened me. I told Katie I'd wait at a coffee shop down the road. She texted me 90 minutes later. On the drive home, she talked almost nonstop. Michael had shown her photographs of her grandparents. An aunt had the same green eyes. Her grandfather had played piano. Apparently, Katie's habit of tapping her fingers when nervous ran through that entire side of the family. I nodded and kept my eyes on the road. Then she said, "He wants to see me again." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. Already Katie went quiet. There it was, the old George. I forced myself to loosen my grip. "Sorry." Over the next few weeks, Katie saw Michael several more times. Lunch, coffee, a walk through a local park. Nothing inappropriate, nothing secret. Still, every time she came home smiling, something ugly stirred inside me. One Saturday, she mentioned that Michael wanted to take her to meet an aunt. What aunt? His sister. Where Lancaster? Who else will be there? Katie lowered her fork. "Dad, what you're doing it again. I'm asking questions. You're interrogating me." I nearly said, "because somebody has to." Instead, I got up and carried my plate to the sink. That evening, I met Anne for coffee. When I told her what happened, she smiled gently. "What, you're trying very hard." That sounded suspiciously like something you say to a child who tied his shoes wrong. Anne laughed. Then her expression softened. "You know what I think is difficult for you, I assume you're going to tell me." When Katie was 7, being a good father meant holding her hand before she crossed the street. I waited. "She's 17 now, George. You can't keep holding her hand just because the road still scares you." I didn't like hearing it. "You make it sound simple." It isn't. You have no idea what it feels like watching someone who abandoned your kid come back and get all the easy parts. Anne studied me. The easy parts: he gets coffee and family photographs. I got fevers at 2 in the morning. Parent-teacher conferences. Linda dying. And you think Katie doesn't know that I don't know what she knows anymore? Anne sat back. "Then maybe you need to stop keeping score." That one stung. We parted awkwardly that evening. A few days later, Michael called me. I almost ignored it. "George," he said, "I wanted to thank you." For what? For letting Katie decide. I didn't answer. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "I've seen what kind of young woman she became. I know who deserves the credit for that." For years, I'd imagined Michael returning as a man I could hate. Instead, he kept refusing to become my enemy. And without an enemy, I was beginning to realize I would eventually have to face myself. By late April, Katie had 2 things hanging over her at once: graduation and college. Acceptance letters sat on the kitchen counter beside financial aid forms. She had been admitted to Penn State, but she was also considering a smaller school farther away. Every time I asked what she was thinking, she said, "I don't know yet." Naturally, I tried to help. I made spreadsheets: tuition, housing, driving distance, meal plans. Katie stared at them one evening. "You made a spreadsheet 3, actually." She laughed despite herself. For a while, things felt normal. Then Linda's birthday came. I should have seen it coming. Grief has a strange way of hiding behind ordinary days. You can go months feeling steady, then a date on the calendar knocks the wind out of you. Katie came downstairs that morning wearing Linda's old silver bracelet. I noticed but didn't say anything. That evening, Michael stopped by to return a photo album he'd borrowed. Katie invited him in. We ended up sitting around the kitchen table. It was the first time the three of us had really been together. Katie turned through the album until she found an old photograph of Linda holding her as a baby. I wish Mom could tell me what she wanted me to do. About college, I asked. About everything. I immediately started reassuring her. Your mother would want you to choose the school that's best for Dad, please. I stopped. Katie pressed her fingers against her eyes. I don't need somebody telling me what Mom would want. I was only trying to help. I know. Her voice cracked. Everybody keeps trying to help. Michael leaned forward. Katie and I don't even know what I'm supposed to feel about you. He went still. I spent my whole life wondering why you didn't want me. Now you're here, and I'm supposed to figure out where you fit. You don't have to figure that out tonight, Michael said. Katie looked at me. And every time I get closer to him, I feel like I'm hurting Dad. You're not, I said automatically. Yes, I am. I can see it. I couldn't deny it. Her tears came then. What am I supposed to call him? What am I supposed to call you? Who's my real father? The room became completely quiet. Michael looked at me. Then he turned back to Katie. George is. I hadn't expected that. Katie hadn't either. Michael continued. I'm your biological father. That's true, and I hope someday I can be someone important in your life. He swallowed. But George didn't take my place, Katie. I left it empty. Katie looked down. He stayed. 3 words. That was all. He stayed. For 14 years, some foolish part of me had wanted recognition for every lunch, packed every fever, every sleepless night. Now it came from the last man on earth I expected to give it. But instead of feeling victorious, I felt ashamed. Because Michael wasn't competing with me. Katie wasn't replacing me. I had turned love into a contest because I was terrified of losing. I reached across the table. Katie looked at my hand before taking it. I owe you something too, I said. What room? She frowned. Room to know him. Room to make your own decisions. Room to grow up without worrying that every step away from me is going to break my heart. Her eyes filled again. It does hurt though, doesn't it? I smiled sadly. Sometimes. Then what am I supposed to do? Go anyway. Michael lowered his eyes, giving us the moment. I squeezed Katie's hand. My job was never to make sure you stayed close enough that I wouldn't be lonely. For the first time, I understood the truth as I said it. My job was to help you become strong enough to leave. Katie leaned across the table and wrapped her arms around me. And standing behind her, Michael quietly wiped his eyes. A week after that night at the kitchen table, Katie knocked on my bedroom door. I was sitting on the edge of the bed trying to read, though. I'd been staring at the same page for 10 minutes. Can we talk? Always. She sat in the chair near the window and tucked one leg underneath herself. For a while, she said nothing. Then she looked at me. I'm sorry I said you weren't my real father. I closed the book. Katie, no. Let me finish. So I did. I knew it would hurt you. That's why I said it. Her honesty surprised me. I was angry and you weren't listening. I wanted to say the one thing that would make you stop. It worked. She winced. I know. I gave her a small smile. That wasn't meant to make you feel worse. She looked down at her hands. I've thought about it every day since. I moved from the bed to the chair across from her. Then you need to hear my part too. She looked up. I was scared. Of Michael. Not exactly. It took me a moment to find the right words. I was scared you wouldn't need me anymore. Katie's expression softened. Dad, I know how that sounds. It sounds sad. I laughed quietly. That's because it is. I told her something I hadn't even admitted to Anne. After Linda died, being Katie's father had given structure to everything. I got up because Katie needed breakfast. I worked because Katie needed a home. I learned to cook because Katie needed dinner. Then suddenly she was 17. College brochures were arriving. She could drive herself. She didn't need me to solve every problem. And then Michael appeared. I think I confused being needed with being loved, I said. Katie's eyes filled. You don't have to do things for me to be my dad. I'm starting to understand that. She reached for my hand, wanting to know, Michael doesn't mean I stopped being your daughter. That was the sentence I had needed from the beginning. But I also understood that I had made it too difficult for her to say, I know. We sat there quietly. Nothing magical happened afterward. Michael didn't disappear, and I didn't suddenly stop feeling jealous. But things became easier. Katie started seeing Michael without watching my face for permission. Sometimes she told me about their conversations. Sometimes she didn't. I learned not to ask. I also called Anne. Coffee, I asked. There was a pause. Are you planning to argue with everything I say? Probably only half. She laughed. Tomorrow at 10. When we met, I apologized. Anne accepted without making me earn it. Then I told her what I had finally realized. For years, I knew exactly who I was. Linda's husband, Katie's dad, the guy everybody called when something broke. And now my daughter's leaving for college. Linda's gone, and apparently people replace their own garbage disposals after watching videos online. Anne smiled. Terrifying. I'm serious. I know. I looked at her. I don't know what comes next. Anne reached across the table. Maybe you don't have to know. That answer would have bothered the younger me. At 60, it felt strangely comforting. Katie eventually chose Penn State. When she told me, I resisted the urge to mention tuition mileage or my spreadsheets. I simply said, I'm proud of you. She smiled. Thanks, Dad. Later that evening, I found myself standing alone in the garage beside the bicycle Katie had ridden as a child. For years, I'd thought fatherhood meant keeping one hand on the back of the seat so she wouldn't fall. But I remembered the day she'd finally learned to ride. The whole point had been to let go without telling her. Then watch her discover she could keep going. By August, Katie's bedroom was half-packed. Cardboard boxes lined one wall. Her desk had disappeared beneath towels, notebooks, extension cords, and enough toiletries to stock a small pharmacy. I stood in the doorway holding a tire pressure gauge. Katie looked at it. No, you haven't even heard what I'm going to say. You checked my tires yesterday. Pressure changes, not overnight. You don't know that. She laughed. That laugh told me we were going to be all right. On move-in morning, we loaded my truck before sunrise and drove to Penn State with the back seat packed to the windows. Michael came by before we left. He didn't try to join us. He simply handed Katie a small envelope. For coffee, he said. Katie hugged him. Thanks. Then Michael shook my hand. Neither of us needed to say much. We both understood that there were some moments a man could ask to share, and others he had to respect from a distance. The drive took longer than it should have because I stopped twice to check the straps over the boxes. Katie pretended to be annoyed. At the dorm, I carried everything she would let me carry. I assembled a lamp, fixed a drawer that wasn't actually broken, introduced myself to her roommate's father. Eventually, there was nothing left to do. That was the part I had been dreading. Katie walked me downstairs. Outside, families were everywhere. Mothers were crying. Fathers were pretending not to. Students were hauling plastic bins across the sidewalk toward lives their parents would no longer witness every day. Katie hugged me. You're going to be okay. Hey, I smiled. I was about to ask you that. I'm serious. So am I. She pulled back. Call me if you need anything. I laughed. That's my line. I'm borrowing it. I kissed her forehead. Go. She took several steps, then turned. Dad. Yeah, I love you. I love you too. Then she walked away. I didn't follow. That mattered. The house was painfully quiet when I got home, but it didn't stay that way forever. Anne and I kept seeing each other, slowly. Dinner sometimes, a movie, Saturday mornings at the farmer's market. She never tried to become Linda. I never wanted her to. By Thanksgiving, Katie came home with 2 bags of laundry and an appetite that suggested Penn State had stopped feeding her. Michael joined us for dessert. Anne was in the kitchen helping me finish dinner when Katie came through the door. I heard her drop her bags in the hallway. Then she walked straight toward me. Hi, Dad. She hugged me. 2 ordinary words. Once I'd been terrified another man could take them away from me. Now I understood they had never belonged to me because Michael wasn't around. They belonged to me because Katie meant them. Later, I stood in the kitchen doorway watching her, and Anne argued cheerfully about how much butter belonged in mashed potatoes. Michael was in the living room, looking through old photographs with Katie's permission. Nobody had replaced anybody. Michael had not replaced me. Anne had not replaced Linda. And Katie, growing up, had not erased the family we'd built. It had simply made room for more people. For most of my life, I thought loving a child meant holding on. Protect them, provide for them. Keep them close enough that you can catch them when they fall. But children grow. And sometimes the hardest part of being a parent isn't staying when they need you. It's knowing when to loosen your grip when they don't. Katie never owed me her dependence because I raised her. And I didn't become less of a father because she wanted to understand where she came from. The man pushing my daughter away had never been Michael. It was the frightened version of me who believed love had to be protected by keeping everyone else out. I nearly lost something precious before I understood that. If you're a parent or grandparent listening to this, maybe you've had your own moment when someone you love began building a life that didn't revolve around you anymore. It can hurt. But being needed less doesn't mean being loved less. Sometimes it means you did your job well. And if this story brought someone to mind, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. If stories about family second chances and the lessons we sometimes learn too late mean something to you, you're always welcome to subscribe and join me for the next one. Hold your family close. Just remember to leave them enough room to grow.